Good morning. My name is Ben Song, and I'm the Online Communications Manager for the California Fiscal Partnership. Thank you for joining our California Hydrogen Policy Series. Today's webinar is going to cover targets for hydrogen stations and fuel cell vehicles in California set by the California Fiscal Partnership and its members. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded. Once the recording is posted, an email will be sent out to all attendees with a link to the recording and the presentation slides. Also, during the webinar, everyone will be muted. However, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and so please use the GoToWebinar tool to ask any questions. Also, during the webinar, the panelists may have their cameras turned on. You can use the slider to change the size of the video or turn it off completely using the camera settings. At the California Fiscal Partnership, we are a collaboration of over 50 industry and government organizations, and we work to bring organizations together to expand the market for hydrogen and fuel cell technology and to help create a cleaner future. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Bill Elrick, Fuel Cell Partnership Executive Director. Bill?
Great, thank you, Ben. And I want to set the stage. We have a couple of great speakers with us today. We want to talk about setting the right kind of path forward to create the zero emission vehicle market in California that's been really in development for decades. You know, we've had great leadership, and now we're looking at even more urgency and need to accelerate what we're doing. So as Ben said, you know, we're the California Fuel Cell Partnership. We look to bring everyone together to build this into a sustainable ZEV market. A few years back, on the slide we have now, we were talking in the early 2010s, even before that, on how to get started. And so we published a roadmap in 2012 that was trying to answer the question, how do we launch this market? Knowing that we did not have hydrogen in a retail environment and fuel cell vehicles were just getting ready to come to market. And so in 2012, we published a document that talked about the first 100 stations, which would enable those early markets to start to allow those first vehicles. And at the time, in 2015, we opened our first 2 retail stations with a couple fuel cell vehicle models. The state then upped those goals to 2025. Ben, if you'll click on the next one more. The state then doubled that to 200 stations, which was again around how do we get everything up and moving? Well, as we were going through that first rollout of stations and vehicles, we also recognized the need to be looking ahead. So we published in 2018 a document about scaling up the market, answering what's the tipping point to when this is a sustainable market over time. We worked with all our government and industry members on what that might look like. And in summary, it came down to at 1,000 stations, which could support up to 1 million vehicles, we would actually be lowering costs, create accessible station supply, build the production and distribution network in a way that the average person could go into a dealership, purchase a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and the cost, the excitement, everything would meet their daily lives. You'll hit one more, Ben. This document, we again published it in 2018. It is available on our website if you want to learn more. But this was our first target at what the established market would look like. Now, what's really exciting, since that was published in 2018, you know, we continue to put vehicles on the road, but the progress being made has really started to accelerate. And click once more, Ben. Whoop. And there's a draft study by Carbout that says if we continue the direction we're on, that the light-duty hydrogen fuel cell vehicle market would be the first identified pathway to a self-sustaining zero-emission market. Meaning, and it's a great report, I encourage you to look it up and read through it. It should be formalized soon, that if we do what we're doing, we follow through and continue, this can be the first sustainable ZEV market anywhere. Now that's really exciting. We can talk more about it later. But what was exciting, not only did they circle around 2030, some of the progress we're being made that's in this document starts to really shine since we published our original document in 2018. One more, Ben. So as we look at where we are today, I just want to point out that we have 11,000 light-duty vehicles on the road. We also have nearly 50 buses up and operational. They've been going for decades with great progress. And as we see the transit agencies and the regulations around those moving towards zero emission, we're seeing more and more of those agencies choose fuel cells and battery electric buses to meet their targets. We've got just under 50 stations, retail stations open now. And if you look down below at the lower half of this chart, in various stages of development, we have over 120 more stations in the queue. Now, this is really exciting because it's taken a while. We've had a lot of lessons learned along the way. So how do we get to this point? So if you click, well, actually, before we click, you also notice we have a number of the retail truck projects starting. These really are the last of the three, light-duty vehicles, buses, and now trucks coming to market. So as we start to embrace and really encourage and accelerate the truck market, they'll be able to learn from the other markets. And we'll talk a little bit more about the types of goals to drive that market forward. Then if you'll go one more, I believe. I wanted to talk about some of that progress. The signals, when everyone's working together, really does drive progress. And that can be the initial government actions, policies, directives, that helps encourage private investment to grow things. The California Energy Commission, which is the primary funder of alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure in the state, their last GFO or solicitation was really exciting in that they switched things around and really looked at long-term market development. And it really flipped the script as far as how many stations, over 100 stations funded, instead of what had been happening, which was maybe 10, 20 at most. And the amount of private investment behind it flipped as well. It was primarily government or public money incentivizing these as far as co-funding. And now we're seeing not only that being more private investment driven, we're also seeing the first stations being built entirely on private funds, not public dollars this way. So that's really exciting. You can see some of the breakdown. Again, I don't want to take the steam away from some of the other speakers, which I will queue up in just a moment. But I also want to point out one other thing that's both challenging and exciting. Ben, I want you to go back one slide for me. There are 11,000 vehicles in the network right now. To date, we have not created new hydrogen production for those vehicles. Those are using existing surplus hydrogen from industrial uses. That means we have essentially taken all the excess supply out of the market, and it creates a great stressor on the current vehicles out in the market because the supply isn't where it needs to be. However, that advances I showed you in the other slides, and the excitement and the building up of the market is starting to create new production numbers. We know there are new plants in California and around the US dedicated to transportation that will start to come online next year and help with that supply problem. There will be more vehicles. We're seeing more manufacturers talk about both early prototypes and even production models coming soon. I think you'll hear more of that next month from some of the manufacturers. And so we do have challenges. These are, early market challenges that we really did expect. They're not pleasant, but let's get back to the topic at hand, which is setting the right targets and path forward to make it a sustainable market so that everything is where we need it to be. Kind of like today's market, where you, after 100 years, have a nice established supply, distribution, and system. Go ahead and click twice more for me, Ben. So the most recent document we published, again, with all of our members, is the fuel cell truck vision for how we get that market up and running. Now, I don't want to get into much detail here, but it really is looking forward to how we start this freight movement for zero emissions in California, what the fuel cell trucks, the hydrogen needs, what needs to happen around this market. We had a webinar, a public webinar, August 12th. You can find that on our website. And we're excited to kind of bring this forward. That really is to answer how we get this going. And as we pull all of those together, the light duty cars, the buses, and the trucks, we put forth the targets we need, both to get started and then to scale up to be a sustainable market. That's where we start to really make the transition California is both envisioned, is both demanded, and now working to see progress towards. So with that, and one more cue there, I think we're going to switch over to our first panelist, but I want to introduce all three. We're going to hear first from James Kast of Toyota, talk about the fuel cell truck vision. And you can go ahead and probably cue his slides up, Ben, or let him have control. We will then hear from Shane Stevens of First Element Fuel and hear a little bit more on the light duty side and the progress they've made. And then we also have with us Sandy Berg of the California Air Resources Board. And she's, I'm hoping, will guide us through some of the discussion later, give us more perspective of government, because this truly is an activity for all zero emission vehicles, of industry and government coming together and lifting this up and making this transition together. So with that, I'm going to step back, let James walk through the new truck vision and go from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill. Just make sure you can hear me and see the screens okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So again, thank you. My name's James Kast. I'll be representing Toyota, but mostly I'll be putting on my fuel cell partnership hat today to walk through the heavy duty vision document that was referenced and really how that sets the guideposts, but also the rally points for how we move forward in the industry to support heavy duty freight movement utilizing fuel cell electric technology. So I'll use a few slides, kind of just snapshots from the document itself, but of course, I think we'll reserve most of the time for Q&A today. So as Bill noted here, we're looking at a document that's really to build from what we've done in light duty with the 2018 vision document and follow this greatly accelerated topic for how we decarbonize heavy duty. Of course, it's a different challenge, a different market, different vehicle segment with many different needs. So we felt it really needed its own separate deep dive into how we really kickstart a market today, which doesn't fully exist, but the writing is clearly on the wall that we have to decarbonize this as quickly as possible. So as noted here, we think the value of a vision document is really to, one, can set that kind of future goal alignment guidepost, but at the same time, bringing us back to today to note that, yes, it may seem far away, but if we don't do start action as stakeholders together today in a very meaningful effort, we're never going to achieve those goals that we see in 2030, 2035. And so that's really the intent here, is not to provide the answers to all the questions that we have, but to make sure all the right questions are being asked and to bring all stakeholders together, kind of in an all hands on deck to move forward in the heavy duty space. So a couple things that you've probably seen from the press releases are really these high level key numbers. So similar to the 1 million vehicles supported by 1,000 stations in 2030 by the light duty vision, we have a similar goal that was seen for heavy duty. And this is really to not just pull numbers out of nowhere, but try to align with the advanced clean truck rules, advanced clean fleet rules being discussed in a way that it would mesh what the policy direction is pushing for over the next decade to 15 years. So with that, with you focus on really Class 8 on road, that's where you see 70,000 trucks being possible in this 2035 timeframe. That's all powered by fuel cell electric truck technology. So it's not just long haul or regional or short drayage, but really all of those combined, but all just in the Class 8 segment. But to do that, you need the stations. So the same idea here, you've got to have a station network that's statewide, but also starts to branch out into other regions. And we're seeing a network of about 200 stations here in the state of California that could enable that type of heavy duty roadmap out to 2035, which of course is the key goal, given that the drayage trucks need to be all zero emission by this time, and that eventually leading to this pathway to 2045, where all trucks on the road are zero emission in just about 25 years here. But of course, to do this requires a lot of effort, both private and public effort today, to make sure that we can get us started now to get along that path. And I think that'll be a key topic for the discussion today. So I alluded to the fact that it starts in California, and you'll note this is a map that shows really our near-term goals of where basically the California market can start and grow in these key freight hubs. So you see a lot of concentration in the port areas, both in NorCal and SoCal, and starting to connect those main regional markets branching from those ports, both the seaports and then even to inland ports. Once you kind of achieve that initial goal in 2025, then it's how you continue to enable more long-haul routes from there, which of course requires a more, of course, national strategy, but specifically a West Coast strategy, building up the coast and then eastward as well. So again, we can dig into this piece here, but the idea was to can provide some kind of roadmap that's not fully the answer towards how we could achieve these goals of 2035 and where stations may need to be located at what scale to actually enable freight movement in the state. Another key topic here that we'll have, we're not just talking about trucks or cars, but both of them together. And I think that's really for a very strong reason. And it's because they do grow synergistically together on the hydrogen side. So beautifully, the scale of light duty, it's many cars, order of magnitude larger. And that scale of manufacturing actually unlocks cost reduction for the vehicles themselves, because you can utilize a lot of that development and components for heavy duty trucks, or at least a number of manufacturers are going that direction. But on the flip side, the hydrogen demand is so much larger for a truck. Think of, say, 40 times or so on average a truck uses compared to a light duty vehicle. And so when you start to think of that scale of hydrogen demand that's predictable as well, you can unlock the investment in scale on the fuel to unlock the fuel cost and reliability that you need for both of the segments. So the two of those really work quite well together as they continue to grow, supporting each other, both on the infrastructure and the vehicle side, to help achieve the cost goals and also higher reliability for both of these markets to get out there and proliferate. So I'll just summarize here quickly with a few key messages from the document. The first here, that fuel cell electric trucks themselves are an essential solution to get to 100% decarbonization, and specifically for Class 8 trucks and many other use cases. So it's really to make sure that they're a major part of the discussion and part of the solution as well. But it's also the timeline. I know that there's guideposts that continuously feels far away, but we really do have to start working on things now, today, as a group of stakeholders to actually achieve these goals. It's also the kind of policies. Really, predictability is huge, and it's something that needs to happen over longer periods of time. So it's not just something we do now and stop, or something we think happens and changes every year, but predictability and long-term vision from a policy support perspective. And then the last piece is what policy really supports. It's not just one piece of the pie, but everything together. So it's the trucks, it's the infrastructure, it's the supply chain, hydrogen production, you name it. It all needs to be considered, coordinated, and supported all together to achieve what we're trying to accomplish here. So Bill, with that, I think I'll wrap it up and pass it off until we come back for the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you, James. And then to queue up a little bit on the light duty side, I'd like to see if Shane Stevens, I don't recall if you had slides available for us.
No slides today.
All right. Well, then with Shane Stevens with First Element, talk about the light duty market and where we're aiming.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And I think before I do that, I just want to spend a moment on heavy duty, coming off of a really good presentation from James Kast. And my name is Dr. Shane Stevens, by the way. I'm one of the founders of First Element Fuel, which today operates the majority of the hydrogen stations in California, and by extension, the U.S. California is by far the leader of deployment. In fact, of the 11,000 or so cars that have been deployed in the U.S., Bill, I imagine that all 11,000 or pretty close to that are all in California, thanks to a great policy ecosystem that's been established here in the state. So before I start talking about the heavy duty, I just want to say that the heavy duty truck market is very exciting. We see a lot of promise in it, a lot of great OEMs like Toyota bringing product to the space. And one of the things that I think is positioning us really well for the development of that market is that we have been now developing and selling hydrogen from retail stations for just about 6 or 7 years here in the state of California. And the lessons learned are proving to be incredibly valuable for the heavy duty space. In particular, we've learned that scaling with hydrogen stations, being able to sell more volumes and keep up with more traffic is really a key to both customer satisfaction, but also to driving down costs. And so we've been really pushing for larger scale of hydrogen stations since we launched our company. And those lessons learned are translating into the heavy duty space really well. We actually were a part of a team that was awarded a joint government funding opportunity grant recently. So the California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission, in a really good partnership, deployed a grant to deploy fuel cell heavy duty trucks and hydrogen stations in the Oakland region. So CTE was the prime applicant and awardee, but as part of that team, First Element will be the hydrogen station and infrastructure provider, and Hyundai will be providing 30 hydrogen fuel cell heavy duty trucks to that project. So I believe that's the largest deployment in the U.S. that's ever been done for heavy duty trucks. So very exciting projects. I just want to commend, the Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission for putting that together and making that happen. We're excited to be a part of it. On the light duty space, I think I want to talk about, there's some quite a few pieces of good news and also quite a few growing pains that we've had. So I want to talk about, what we've gone through briefly, and then kind of how we're positioning ourselves to move forward. So one topic that's top of mind is, as Bill mentioned earlier in his slides, we've had quite a struggle with hydrogen fuel supply to our stations. And our company, First Element Fuel, started off as a company that was wholly focused on just the station development part and getting the stations to operate, and we were buying our fuel from other suppliers. And over time, that's become more and more difficult as the supply chain has struggled to keep up. This morning, I woke up and got a report that 16 out of our 28 hydrogen stations were out of fuel. And so I think one of the things that we all need to realize is that, the fuel that we depend on today, gasoline, diesel, these markets have grown up organically over 100 years, and they're now what are called, commoditized, right? There's lots of different sources for it. There's lots of different distribution methods. That's not the case with hydrogen today. Today, there's really just kind of one sole supplier that we've depended on in California, who's Air Products and Chemicals, because hydrogen has been kind of a specialty gas rather than a commodity fuel. So we are trying to make that transition happen, but we're not there yet. So some of the steps that we've taken and that are now coming to light is about a year and a half ago, First Element started making investments, and over the last 18 months have put $20 million into hardening the supply chain. So that's a combination of delivery trailers for delivering both liquid and gaseous hydrogen, and we're building a hydrogen hub in Livermore, California, which is a facility that will be able to take hydrogen and put it into the distribution trailers and shore up the supply chain. Those assets, after making the investments 18 months ago, are finally starting to come online just now. They'll be coming online throughout Q4 of this year and into Q1 of this year, and we're working hand in hand with our supplier Air Products on a transition over the next 2 quarters, where we will first use our assets to shore up their supply chain and eventually transition to using primarily our assets to supply to our stations. So we're very excited about that. Unfortunately, hydrogen today is not, there's not a lot of components and infrastructure and supply chain pieces that can be bought off the shelf. So it's been a bit of a long road since making our initial investments that those assets are coming into play. But we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. In addition to that, we partnered with Air Liquide, another industrial gas company, to build a facility in Nevada that is fully dedicated to transportation fuel. So again, in Q4 of this year, that facility will be coming online to provide a lot more hydrogen fuel into the marketplace that, again, is not the traditional specialty gases kind of hydrogen, but actually purpose-built, dedicated for transportation fuel. So have to commend Air Liquide there for making that large private investment. So I think the policy signals in California are a really great story because we today lead the world in the number of fuelings for fuel cell electric vehicles, and we've taken those learnings to create a more favorable hydrogen station product, a hydrogen station product that can scale, but also it's unlocked a lot of money in private investments. So, you know, again, First Element, we've put in 20 million to shore up the supply chain of private investments. The plant that Elrick is building and the distribution assets, I think, total about 200 million in private investment. So you can see that with policy consistency and confidence in the marketplace, the kind of investments that are being made. So that being said, we are still going through some growing pains and teething pains, and I expect that that will get better over the next 3 to 6 months as these investments start producing actual assets that will shore up the supply chain. So going forward, I think I said there are a lot of good news stories too, and I think I want to highlight a couple of those. So we have been able to develop and deploy hydrogen stations that are much higher performing for the customer experience. So today our hydrogen stations have gone from stations that just can fuel 1 car at a time to stations that can fuel 4 cars at a time. We call that 4 simultaneous fueling positions. So today at a station, at the hydrogen stations that we're building, we can fill about between 300 or 400 cars a day, depending on how much fuel those cars consume. For us, that's a very exciting leap forward because you start to see the kind of scale that the market will demand, right? For the amount of real estate at a gas stations are doing thousands of cars a day. We're now achieving 300 to 400 cars, and we have a line of sight until being able to do 1,000 or 2,000 cars a day. That also prepares us for the heavy duty truck market, which will demand higher amounts of fuel. If you're going to be filling 50 or even 100 trucks a day, that's going to need the ability to fill a lot of kilograms of hydrogen to have a lot of throughput capacity. And then the other, I think, piece of good news that goes along hand in hand with that is, in addition to being able to support more cars and improve the customer experience so that customers aren't queuing, the higher capacity stations also tackle price. And for us, price of hydrogen at the pump is one of the main challenges that we have to tackle. And the good news is that we're dramatically improving on that already. So over the last couple of years, we've cut down our price of hydrogen from $15 per kilogram plus tax, and it's been cut down to $12 per kilogram plus tax. So that's about a 20% reduction in price already. And again, we have a line of sight into getting another 20% really in the next couple of years, and then probably another 20% beyond that is what we're working on. And we think with those kind of pricing, you can have competitive price of hydrogen compared to that of gasoline. I think when you look at adoption of zero emission cars, customers, it's tough to get customers to shoulder the burden of extra cost of fuel, right? And we can't expect them to do that. We need to be competitive with gasoline. Customers have to worry about paying a mortgage, about putting their kids through college. So while they may be willing to do the right thing and pay a little bit more for a car, I think it's really our responsibility to make that fuel price competitive so that the customers can afford to drive a zero emission car and make that choice without having to assume the burden. So for us, that's a really huge bogey that we're aiming at. And another piece of good news is that we're doing that with fewer and fewer government subsidies as the years go on. So when we built our first network of stations, we had a higher percentage of government subsidies for every station that we built. That's being drastically reduced, and we do see a line of sight where by the end of this decade, we'll probably be in a position where we can start to sunset government funding for stations altogether. So it's very exciting, and I don't want to steal the thunder of the car makers, because we're really on the station side. But I will say that what we see from our customers, folks are really excited about the cars. Frankly, the provision of hydrogen and the disruptions in the supply chain have been, I think, the biggest challenge for customers, but customers love the car. And some really exciting data for us is that the customers appear to be using fuel cell cars as their primary car. They drive them, every day as their primary car. We see that sometimes with zero emission vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles, customers are driving those kind of as their secondary car. With the fuel cell cars, that's not the case. So we're very excited about that, and we think that this is a really bright future. We're turning the corner on a couple of the challenges that we had, and we've made great progress to set us up for some really exciting growth and some really exciting reductions in price that'll put us competitive with more polluting fuels and get us on a cleaner road here in California. So I'll conclude with that, and I guess I'll be around for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great, thanks Shane. With that, I want to bring us back to where this market really started, and that is the leadership of government, and in particular the Air Resources Board, decades ago with the original zero emission vehicle mandate, but also the other mechanisms of support that CARB and other agencies, elected officials have done. So we have Sandy Berg with CARB with us, which I'm pleased to have her join us, both from her position at CARB, but she has been such a dynamic leader the last couple of years here with the partnership. Sandy, I wanted to kind of bring you in, maybe comment on some of the things you've heard, but give a little bit of the government perspective before we really launch into some questions and discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for having me, and thank you, James and Shane, for such great presentations. Not only do I wear my CARB hat, and as Bill said, I am the immediate past chair for the California Fuel Partnership, but I've been an active EV driver, both battery and fuel cell cars, for the last 7 years. And on top of that, as many of you know, I'm also a business owner in Los Angeles, and I do have 8 heavy-duty trucks. So 1 Class 7 and 6 Class 8 trucks. So I will be participating in this revolution, going from light duty to heavy duty along with the marketplace. It's been just such an honor to be part of CARB and to be part of this process. My first meeting was September of 2004 when we adopted the first PAVLI regulation, and to see how that has dovetailed with the ZEV mandate and then evolving through 2012 to the clean cars. And now as we're looking at truly the multiple stakes in the ground for fully zero emission and complete sales between 2035 and 2045, it is really, truly an exciting time to be part of this landscape, but not without its challenges. And that's why we're at the webinar today. I think one of the things that I am just so reminded of from my perspective is how important that we keep all technologies front and center, and that we realize through this transformation that everything is going to be a challenge, because it is a transformation, and we're going to need multiple solutions. I've been reminded many times and have been, thought back and very early days of my time with CARB that there is no silver bullet here. There is no one technology that is going to get us from petroleum to electrification. And so we need not only the batteries, the fuel cells, and we're going to have to look at some biogases and other types on some of those really, really difficult modes of transportation. So I'm excited today to be part of this Q&A. I really am excited to see CARB's going to be doing some very exciting things throughout 2022, not only on the scoping plan, but we, as you know, have several regulations now in place. and for the transformation of buses, shuttle buses, and now we have an OEM for the truck regulation, and we've been really wrestling with that fleet regulation that will come up next year, and then back to the next jump on our light duty and clean cars. So lots of exciting things on the horizon. And what is number one in so many minds is, are we going to have the infrastructure? And that is why today's webinar is very critical, because government policy and our partners, not only in industry, but NGOs and communities, we need to make that commitment to infrastructure. It isn't just a chicken or egg discussion. It is the need to have certainty, and there is a need to know for the customer that when they buy this advanced clean car, which comes with some behavioral modifications anyway, that they're going to be able to get fuel. And so I look forward to the questions and to see how we can further this discussion.
Great, thank you. With that, I'd like to invite Shane and James kind of back on screen. We've got a bunch of questions coming in. I want to frame this with I'll say a statement and then a question around that. Having been at the partnership now for a while, which is really just a question was about what's our role? Our role really is bringing everyone together. We don't make the vehicles, we don't create or impose the regulations or provide funding. We don't make the fuel or sell it to others. You know, that's what the other panelists up here do. So to a question, we don't have the ability to kind of play with the carrots or sticks. Our role is bringing everyone together. And the great thing is that everyone, by light of today, but just over 20 years now, are willing and wanting to do that. I think the biggest thing, and now my question, the biggest thing that I've seen is not just the need and the willingness for you all to come together, but to push and drive each other and share with each other what you need from each other. Meaning, you know, it's policies in government that can inspire that private investment. It's, you know, station developers and auto and vehicle manufacturers talking about collectively how they develop the market together. So with that, I'd like to ask a pretty broad question. When we look at the types of things we do collectively, what do you see from the others are needed to really make the big steps from your organization to go deeper, farther, and more committed to this technology and others? What are the signals you look from each other?
Yeah, Bill, maybe I'll chime in first here, because I think it's a bit more of a signal, right? A signal is a start, just like we've seen. I'll use the policy example. You know, we've seen the signal there, but we still don't. That doesn't mean the demand is there from all the operators to buy the trucks. It doesn't mean that we can, with more certainty, know that that's going to happen. So it's really a signal is there, but that really is a signal to engage to those deeper conversations you noted. So we obviously, from an automaker perspective, both on the trucks and the vehicle side, we kind of look to other markets as well. You know, what's happened in California is quite different than other markets that have happened, and they've taken very different strategies for how to align the chicken and the egg, if you will, right? So there's been big JVs with a number of companies. There's been build it and they will come, both on the station side or the car side first, and there's been kind of misalignment. So I think for us, it's how can we learn from all those as an industry globally and best create success in California going forward to first improve and move forward in light duty, but then very much start and hit heavy duty on the ground running. You know, let's not have the same issues we're talking about today on light duty. Let's make sure that there's stations in the ground aligned with how many trucks are coming. Because we know that, Shane, you're not going to go build a station unless you know there's going to be trucks there, and we're not going to go sell a bunch of trucks until we know there's some kind of network of stations that could support them. So really, a short answer, we have to talk, and we have to talk an awful lot to make sure we're well aligned.
I'll follow in on that just to say that I think what James said is true, but I think that this is where, you know, policy can play a really critical role, and has played a critical role, right? I mean, we have the most exciting zero emission vehicle market in the world in California, and also the most exciting, you know, hydrogen fuel cell vehicle market in the world in California, and that's not by accident, right? It's decades of policy design that got us here. So I think we're already seeing some really nice benefits out of the, you know, out of the policy consistency that we've experienced so far, right? I talked about some of the private investments that have happened in the supply chain infrastructure. I think the organic nature of the market combined with the policy signals has forced us as a company to look at scaling to higher performing hydrogen stations, providing a better customer experience, forcing ourselves to look at how do we get more competitive on cost, right? So I think those are all benefits of what we've seen already. Over the horizon, there is, I think, a little bit of uncertainty that we should rectify soon, right? There's right now a government funding program through the state of California for the expansion of hydrogen stations that sunsets in 2024. And there's no clear plan for extending that. And frankly, 2024 is a little bit early, I think, to pull the rug out from funding. I think by the end of this decade, we can get there and we can sunset government subsidies, but 2024 is a bit early. So I think that's a really key thing that we should be looking at, because, you know, when you have the kind of momentum that we're seeing and the kind of hundreds of millions of dollars that are being invested into the hydrogen infrastructure supply chain, you want to build on that momentum, right? Let's turn that into billions of dollars that are being invested in the hydrogen supply chain in California, right? And then, you know, if policy levers want to be used to kind of, you know, push things in a certain direction or another, let's do that. But I think just sending a consistent signal that, yes, we're going to continue to support the build out of stations. Yes, there's a plan that's been laid out, which actually I think the California Fuel Cell Partnership did a great job of bringing the stakeholders together to make a plan to say 1,000 hydrogen stations in 2030 is appropriate, it's prudent, it keeps us on the growth plan. So I think we should rally around that and you know, start to show that consistent policy signal of, yes, we're committing to this beyond 2024, right?
I'm absolutely in agreement with both what James and Shane have said, and would like to add that, you know, what drives is really pushing and pulling, because at the end of the day, thank goodness for the innovators. The innovators truly are the ones that make the vision possible and keep the rest of us chasing it. Businesses, including businesses like my own, we've been in business for multiple years and we bring out new product lines, but we don't necessarily cause our own transformations. And so as I look at what pushes and pulls, truly, it is not only the signal, which I agree with you, James, is an invitation to engage and not enough. We need more. Not only has the policies of California have set us up in leadership, and it is the uncertainty that keeps us all at bay at times, and it's the innovators that keep pushing us. And so, and from a policy perspective, we want a crystal ball like everybody else, so that the public funds that we are spending and accountable for, that we feel very strongly are for, you know, the long-term public good. And what we know about transformation is it is some fits and starts. And so all of these things are critical. And the more that we can as policymakers give a level of certainty, but industry's got to come on that back end and take it and run with it. And it just is one of these tensions that ebbs and flows and is challenging.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can say with confidence that First Element Fuel, we will run with that football for sure. And I think, you know, for us, we're bullish on hydrogen, right? We don't have to be convinced, but of course we have to go to the market. We have to raise that capital. We have to depend on partners that are raising spending the capital on the fuel supply chain, on partners who are spending the capital on developing vehicles. So it is an ecosystem, but yeah, we certainly don't have to be convinced. We are ready to go. So.
Well, and Jane, I'll join you that I personally, I'm saying this personally, as I'm also convinced and think hydrogen and fuel cells has a long runway as a technology that's going to be very important, along with batteries. And but again, it's that tension of what do we see and how do we gauge, and bringing all of this together. As many of you know, in my household, my husband is Professor Dan Sperling, and we have lots of discussions, great discussions around the dinner table as to how this all should go.
So that's great. There's a lot of questions coming in. I see we have a good 40 minutes left, so I think we can get to many of them. I think the one I want to go to now is California's leadership, in that it has been the ZEV regulation that's been emulated across the country, and we see things like low carbon fuel standard being picked up in other parts of the world. I'm wondering if you all can talk about how the leadership here in California, how do we transfer that knowledge to others? How do we really look at, there's a hydrogen earth shot going on right now and into tomorrow for the US Department of Energy, and really picking this up. We know there's big infrastructure bills that are calling out both battery and hydrogen applications. We are engaging more of our states in different ways. But how do you see taking what we're doing here and taking the bigger targets, the bigger opportunities, and rolling it out towards others?
I can start on this one a little bit. I will say that there are a lot of things that we are doing right, and that the world is asking us to, if they can learn from it. And I think that there's a couple of reasons why California is in the position that it's in. One is, I think, one that, not to beat a dead horse, but it's the policy that has been put in place over the last several decades, right? I mean, starting with the formation of the California Air Resources Board and regulations that brought in the catalytic converter, right? California has always been pushing it on the forefront of, how to make vehicles cleaner. And it's really driven, I think, the automotive industry globally, right, with the regulations. Another one I think is more of the culture of California, and this is very personal for me because 16 years ago, I moved to California because I wanted to work on clean energy, because it was the place to be, right, for that. But what I found is that there's a very embracing attitude of entrepreneurship. I, as a young grad student, I was engaging in policy discussions with some of the lead agencies in the state. Which was shocking to me, because I was like, wow, people actually want to hear my ideas as a young graduate student, right? Not something that I expected, but there is that openness to hearing new ideas. And now here I am. I'm one of the founders of a company, and very excited to wake up and do what I do every day to try to bring cleaner fuel and help bring cleaner vehicles to the California marketplace, right? And so I think that organic nature of the entrepreneurship has created a very real market, where we're selling retail fuel. We try to keep our stations open 24 hours a day wherever we can. In a lot of other countries, that's a lot more regulated. So anyway, so sorry for being a little bit long-winded at the beginning there, but I think there is a lot where we are on the cutting edge and that people want to learn from. And I think both from a policy perspective and from a technology perspective, what we've deployed in the marketplace, we should be looking at what we do as scalable. Everything from how we deal with fire code and permitting to, I think, the LCFS program is actually a super exciting program that I wish it were replicated everywhere, because I think it's a very exciting policy mechanism that you can pull levers to really help accelerate zero emission fuels and zero emission fueling infrastructure. So I think that's a great learning that can be exported to how we've learned how to scale with hydrogen and reduce the price at the pump. We're getting a lot more volume and a lot more sales on hydrogen cars here than a lot of other countries in the world. Their deployment of stations might be close to ours, but we're seeing a lot more usage, a lot more fueling, and learning how to achieve that scale and reduce that cost. So I think we should be looking at this as an exportable model, and let's maintain the leadership here, because when you have leadership here, that brings value, right? And we can capitalize on that value as Californians. So anyway, I'll wrap up with that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we should continue to maintain that leadership position and look for how we can export it and share that teaching with others.
I do think that California's leadership has been about the partnership. And even though nobody in industry signs up for having government as a partner, California has done very, very well in its CARB model. It's interesting because we all do think about the catalytic converter as an example. But if you go back and read that regulation was a performance-based. Industry came up with a catalytic converter because it's really industry that knows. They're the experts in their area of expertise. It's the innovators that see things in a new and different way. So California's leadership has been about its entrepreneurial spirit, as Shane has really aptly outlined. But it is that shotgun marriage, if you will, of government policy and entrepreneurs, government, and NGOs. We can't discount the fact that our environmental partners have pushed us also along the way. We would have gone much slower. And now as we look at that leadership, I think that we've got to start thinking about the world leadership and leveraging. It has to be a world market. I agree with Commissioner Monahan, who often reminds me that, you know, we need to make sure that California isn't its own little island. We do need to have that world market. So not only the North America, but certainly we're seeing the EU with more stringent greenhouse gas standards. The investment that China has made in its energy acceleration to clean energy is very impressive. And so as we look at these things, I think California is now on a team of leaders, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. No, really good points. I think I can only add a little bit here, but the big thing for me is making sure that our experience can actually be translated to other places and they're willing to listen. I think we've seen that as a major gap where everybody wants to be that kid that grows up and experiences everything for themselves, as opposed to learning from their parents, if you will, right? They want to fail, they want to pilot for 10 years, they want to redo what we've already done, which we say, no, please don't do that. Like, really learn from us. Come see success. These vehicles do exist. I think a lot of folks don't believe that we can share good messages. So let's start 10 years ahead for those new markets and not have everybody start from square one with a small demonstration station that really doesn't sometimes push the needle.
Staying high level, talking about that leadership, our common objectives and urgency around the climate and others, I'd like to, and maybe start with Sandy. I mentioned briefly at the beginning CARB's draft self-sustainability report on the light duty market end. I wonder if you might, and then the other two to follow, talk a little bit about what that means for achieving that ZEV transition, at least in this market sector overall, and then how that brings us to help us today. And that second part may be especially for James and Shane, about when we have those big targets, when we can see a line of sight towards a solution that we can follow through. How does that lead to both the long-term and even the short-term challenges we encounter?
You know, I think if I could really articulate that, the answer to that question, it would really elevate my status tremendously. It's like asking the question, how do you eat an elephant? And so it is such a overwhelming It's an overwhelming task that is in front of us. So I think really what happens when we have these documents that are based on science, that are very well thought out, that get multiple stakeholder input, that are worked out over a period of time, I think what it allows us to do is to go back to something James said, and that is align. Well, first of all, be on the same page on the goal, but to align as to where the challenges are. And at that point, you do have to step back and start implementing. You have to implement one step at a time on multiple fronts. And that's why transformations are not simple, and generally messy, and you have to have great will, great political will, great individual will, company will, to get through, to get to the other side. And if we think about the ZEV regulation, that's just about 30, if not 30 years old. We've been at this for 30 years talking about. And now we're going to go from now till we're just in 2022, right around the corner, right? To 2035, you're talking 13 years now. We're really going to make the huge jump. So it's taken us 30 years to get where we are today. And now we're going to make this quantum leap. So I have to believe that as we're putting together these plans, bringing together the partners that we need, the learning we do from each other, which Shane pointed out, and our willingness to slog through is going to be critical.
So I think I'll give two reactions to that. One is, for us, setting these targets and outlining that vision is really critical to creating confidence in the marketplace, right? And again, our company, First Element Fuel, we don't need to be convinced, right? We see that hydrogen has a huge future, that zero emission fueling is incredibly important to the planet, to a lot of things that we're doing. But you do need to find people that will invest. You need to find partners that will build the vehicles, build the other parts of the supply chain that are needed, right? So I think it's incredibly important to set out that vision in that sense. The other reaction that I'll give is based on something that Sandy said, which I love, which is it's better to set the performance targets and then let industry respond, right? So I think as we build towards that vision, there's going to be a lot of learnings along the way, and we don't want to be too prescriptive, right, into how that happens, because somebody might invent or come across the next great new method to produce hydrogen, or whatever it may be. We want to be able to capitalize on that and not slow down or have our hands tied because the goals were too prescriptive, right? So I think that's something that, from my opinion, the Air Resources Board has been really good at over the years with your policy programs, is looking at the outcome, right? Are you reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Are you reducing criteria pollutant emissions? Are you creating efficiency, right? And use those metrics to set the targets and build towards that. So those are the two reactions that I would give to that.
Yeah, no, good stuff, Shane, and great for starting us off here, Sandy, because indeed the vision and the long direction is clear in there, as I think I noted before. So it's really the second half of that is how you then achieve that, again, with supportive policy. So we kind of have the stick part of it, but the care part of it and other things that go along with it is what drives that demand. And where a truck customer or a vehicle customer feels confident that they can actually afford those vehicles, and they can use those vehicles to meet their needs because the infrastructure is there, because the automakers are invested into it. So I think it's the two parts really going together from a policy perspective. And if I kind of bring it back to the today, right? Today, there is not a whole lot of confidence right now. We could be selling probably a lot more cars, but we just simply can't, because that confidence isn't quite there today. And the truck side is doing something really on a separate vision where everybody's coming together as one. We have, as Shane alluded to, right, there's a station with 30 trucks. That's not a broader vision of everything just yet. It's kind of starting with one thing. Same with Hyzon, same with Nikola, same with us and Shell. So there's a lot of these different, kind of initial pilots, if you will, trying to align that supply demand so we can guarantee with ourselves that'll work, but a broader vision, it's how you get to that point. So still a lot of work to be done, but happy to be working with all of us here on this call.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
Bill, if I could just add there, there's no question there is a leap of faith here over a pretty deep chasm, if you will. When I look at it as a business owner and try to figure out how I'm going to go electric, and I'm a small business owner. It's easy to want to be, it's not easy, it's necessary sometimes to want to sit back and figure out how this is all going to work, and yet we're on a short time frame. So I think it's going to be more incumbent on all of us, and especially I'll say as a member of the CARB board, to be out there in the public and talking more and assuring more and participating to understand, because we do need to build that confidence, but we are building it on the faith that we're going to take this leap and it's going to work. And I believe it's going to work, but there is some faith that is needed in this whole, I think that's the magic dust, as they say.
Clearly we do too, that's for sure.
I think it's interesting because if we take the science along with the faith, what we see now is we've set some targets out there to get where we want to go. That early analysis showed this market could be sustainable at costs that provide it to the customer, from fuel to vehicle at a competitive price with petroleum or batteries. The world analysis shows those two are head-to-head at scale. But if we take that self-sufficiency study where it says we could do it, before 1,000 stations, that we've got if anyone's gone out and read the Clean Energy or the California Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program benefits, that the hydrogen, petroleum reduction, and greenhouse gas benefits are leading the way. We've put these together along with pending, I think, over $3 billion in California for ZEV support. We've got big national federal bills. We've got the momentum, the direction, the lessons learned to bring this fully successful in California, and then enable that transition and that acceleration outside to other markets, whether it be the neighboring states here as kind of the first capable outreach mechanisms to other regions popping up. And we know this is happening in the Northeast, in parts of the Midwest, in Texas. There's a lot more opportunity here. And California has led that way with these things. With that, I'm going to take a quick detour. There's a lot of questions around the current market. And I want to say that is an issue. This is not the primary purpose of today's session. But I think the reason we focus on these larger targets and larger activities is we've got to be looking. We saw 5 years ago, as we first started to launch the market, the challenge that if we aren't scaling this up, if we aren't going to the next place, those first steps don't go anywhere. And so I want to recognize those questions. We can touch upon some of them, but we want to focus today on the bigger picture and how we get there. And that enables folks like Shane and James and others to put private investment to really build up the supply chain and other activities. There's talks about the current supply issue. I think it was said already, we don't have more supply in the market today to bring that to you. And that will come in the coming months as these new developments from these bigger approaches start to see that production come online. And with that, the investment in the distribution and even, improved nozzles, improved, inside the dispenser technologies, these all go hand in hand, the short term, the immediacy, as well as the long term. So I want to maybe if anyone else cares to jump on that, please do. But I see a lot of questions on what is rightfully so a very urgent need. But at the same time, we do these things in parallel, both the immediate and the long term, so that we are successful. Don't know if anyone else wanted to comment towards any of that.
I mean, I'll comment on a few of the, you know, I tried to address some of those during my opening remarks, but I'll try to dive a little bit deeper on sort of the, you know, some of the growing pains that we've had and continue to experience right now. So I think on the supply chain, you know, like I mentioned, we have made some investments. I think from the perspective of our company, we would have liked those investments to happen sooner. I think we saw a crisis coming along a long time ago with the fact that, you know, the hydrogen that's being sold to vehicles today, it comes from the kind of traditional specialty gases market, and it's not designed to support the vehicle marketplace. And there's an additional, I think, challenge, which is that there's a very limited supplier base of those, right? It's not like we have a lot of competition in that marketplace where we can go buy hydrogen, even as a specialty gas, let alone as a fuel. So, you know, we've been pushing for a while to make investments to try to make the supply chain stronger. The investments did eventually happen. You know, from our perspective, would have been great if they happened sooner. And I think that's why we're experiencing a lot of the hiccups that we're experiencing now. The other thing is that from our perspective, if we could, you know, order a hydrogen distribution trailer and have it next week, that'd be great, and we would do that, right? But, you know, we ordered hydrogen distribution trailers a year and a half ago, and we just got, you know, the first 2 of them last week, right? And we're going to have more rolling out in the coming months, so they're arriving now. But that's a little bit of the reality of this early stage marketplace where everything is kind of custom built and specialized, right? So that I'm sure that doesn't give a lot of solace to customers that, you know, can't drive their Mirai right now because there's no fuel. You know, but that is the reality of the early marketplace and why these things have taken longer to materialize. You know, the good news part of that is, you know, help is on the way. I would say that there's, you know, still some risk over the next 3 to 6 months that you'll have interruptions. I think, you know, as we get into 2022 and especially into the middle of 22, I would anticipate a really significant improvement on the supply chain disruptions. The second part, I think, of the growing pains in the marketplace is, and it's you know, there's some similarities to the story, is that hydrogen station equipment is also brand new, right? And so we're really pushing to get higher performing, better equipment. But the fact of the matter is that the equipment has never really been produced at scale anywhere in the world, right? So we launched a first batch of stations in 2015 and 16. And we found a lot of teething issues with the equipment because it had never been built at scale, never deployed in the field. And we were basically beta testing on customers, you know, for lack of a better term. And, you know, we hired some great technicians and were really aggressive about getting those teething issues fixed. But, you know, it was tough. It was a tough, you know, 6 to 12 months after first deploying that equipment to kind of work out bugs. And so now we've designed, you know, higher performing equipment. So I think the customer experience is going to be better. It helps us reduce price. You can fill more cars at a time, but, you know, it's a new generation of equipment again. So once again, this is deployed out in the field and we're seeing teething issues. One of the things that we've done as First Element to help address this is that in our hub in Livermore that we talked about, we've, in addition to be able to fill hydrogen trailers and help shore up the supply chain, we also put a platform for field testing of equipment. Because we believe one of the reasons that we're seeing all these teething pains is because suppliers that build this equipment today, they don't have a proper test platform, right? They're not putting hours on these systems and pressure testing them and doing a lot of fills on them before they go out into the field, right? So we basically end up doing a lot of that beta testing on customers, which is not right. So we're hoping with our test platform, I'm sure it won't be perfect, but we'll work out a whole lot more of those teething issues and bugs with field testing at a testing platform before it goes and starts serving customers. So that's one of the things that we've invested in and that we're doing to try to make that better. So I think those are kind of the 2 main categories, you know, and I think just it is an early market, right? So we're going to see continued improvement in ergonomics and convenience. You know, Bill, you mentioned the nozzles of for refueling the cars. The nozzles have come a really long way in a fairly short period of time, I expect we're going to continue seeing more improvements, right? So this is you know, a market that if you look at commercially deployed vehicles, it's, you know, it's 6 years old, right? It's pretty young. You compare that to gasoline, which has been over 100 years in the development and perfection of the technology, and we're very young. But I think we'll get to a place where I think over the next 6 months, the supply chain for sure is going to get better. Over the next 2 to 3 years, I expect that all of the equipment performance, ergonomics is going to be, you know, greatly improved. And again, there's an importance in having those consistent policy signals so that people continue to invest and continue making those improvements to serve the customer. So that was long-winded, but I know it's a really important topic and on the top of everybody's mind. You know, and again, this doesn't give a lot of confidence to the Mirai customer who, you know, wants to go fill their car tomorrow. But hopefully it just helps, you know, people understand kind of what we're going through, the things that we're doing, the big investments we're making to try to help address these things, and that, you know, be a little bit patient, it will get better.
Yeah, and Shane, again, I want to note there's a couple key points there, right? Just seeing our mutual customer, even that acknowledgement is huge. And the First Inland team has always been very good with that. And of course, we can't wait for your investments to come to fruition either. We're counting the days, my friend. So appreciate all that. I do have to chime in here really briefly as well, because, you know, it's been one of these things where we are still early, but we're definitely beyond the beta testers now, right? We're starting to the point where customers that are having this experience will never buy a fuel cell car ever again. That this is a fact. That's just, we have to understand that reality, that it is creating issues to continue to grow this market, and there is confidence that has been shaken. So I do want to acknowledge that, because we see customers coming directly to us every day with these kind of issues and concerns. So with that starting point, though, we do see, again, the future is going to be better, and we really hope that it is better soon, because that has always, again, been the issue with hydrogen. How do we invest at the right time so it's better when we know it needs to be? I feel like we're always 1 or 2 years behind. What can we do today to make sure a year from now we're not stuck in the same situation? And so that's something we're very much trying to do as Toyota, how we can support with that, but also very much in the near term. I think everybody's aware here, just about every Mirai driver, that fuel is paid for by Toyota, right? So we've been supporting that upfront. We've been supporting people in rental cars, as many as we can find, which, by the way, you can't really find rental cars anymore right now. And I guarantee you, just about anything we can today and for the next 3 to 6 months, we're finding any ways to support customers, because we know how important today is for the success of the light duty market. If we assume that this will be acceptable for 6 months, I think we're all making a pretty poor assumption. And clearly, Shane, you're not making that assumption with the investments your team is making. So the last point I'll make is heavy duty. If we did this to heavy duty, it would die almost immediately. Their business depends on it. Their TCO depends on it. Sandy, I'm sure you can speak to this. If you bought a truck, it couldn't fuel for even 1 day out of that week, you'd be buying a different technology truck, I think, because you couldn't run your business. So the stakes are higher, and we have to be aware of that and moving forward together on it.
Well, you both bring such good points, and, you know, I lease my trucks, and in the truck and bus rule, the majority of my trucks came up for lease in 2010. So I went through the 2010 where we did have trucks off the road because of the new technology within the gas and diesel models. And so new technology has growing pains. And but as I have said at other seminars and other places I've been asked to speak, we have spoiled our consumers, and the utilities have spoiled them the most. We come in, and if we can't flip a switch and our lights don't go on, I mean, how could that be? It needs to be seamless. And so there are challenges on all electric vehicles. There are just challenges because this is a full transformation. And I think one of the things we need to add to our list, and I'll put my fuel cell partnership hat on now, is really one of our core objectives, and that is consumer awareness and bringing the consumer along and making their education part of this whole process, because when it comes time, hydrogen and fuel cells is a very exciting choice, and we want them to see that excitement, as well as, but first and foremost, of course, EVs is the right choice, and then it is what technology would best suit your own need. And it's the same thing for businesses. And so having that education out there, and earlier is better.
That's great. I'd like to kind of then talk, there are a couple questions here, and I think there's an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the synergies. And I think this is the synergies between heavy duty and light duty you touched upon, if there's more to say there, as well as the synergies between hydrogen and electricity, the two energy carriers, and the two technologies when it comes to batteries and fuel cells. You know, Sandy, I don't know if you want to start us off, but especially from the government role, who I think has done a great job of what are our targets, where are we trying to go, most importantly, setting that forth for us.
You know, there's no question that you can set the goals, but it really is, I wrote this down because I love this. We talked about, I think, Shane, you said the ecosystem that is just so important. And when you look at, you know, this is really siblings. And each of them have such an incredible role, and there's no question how they branch off and become competitors, but it really is siblings making this work. It truly is going to be the role of electricity and how that is manufactured that is going to see us into this next huge energy boom of electrification. And these are siblings that have a great role in playing together. And so from a personal perspective, I like to keep that in my head, is that I need them both to succeed in a big way, and in a holistic way, in order for us to get that seamless experience that people have come to expect.
Well, maybe I'll jump in with a couple points as well, and good stuff again, Sandy. We're having a great conversation between the three of us. Thanks, Bill, for hosting today. The first one for me is on the fuel cell itself. So when talking to modularity, you know, we developed it for the car, but obviously we take two of those into a heavy duty truck. And as announced actually late last year, we're looking to bring that same exact technology and system into all kinds of mobility applications and stationary applications. So I think from there you can see the way fuel cell technology can decarbonize so many different applications. And of course, heavy duty and light duty, the key topics of today. I will note as well on the station side itself, right? I think you'll see a lot of commingling of, you know, today we have gasoline and diesel. Pretty soon we'll see something like hydrogen and electric charging could be at these sites all at the same time. Is something that's been studied by a number of folks. But there's also the grid connectivity aspect of this. As you keep pushing and pushing for more and more higher renewable penetration, it gets harder and harder to do so without energy storage. And that's where you see this really nice interplay that electrolysis and hydrogen storage can then feed into other markets where the two can actually synergistically, again, grow together, push higher percent renewables, more renewable hydrogen. You have more of these fuels to help support both types of vehicles.
So I would talk a little bit more to the synergies between the heavy duty and the light duty refueling, because that's more in my wheelhouse. And I'm going to get a little technical, so sorry. So there's kind of three main categories where there's synergies, right? I talked about one a little bit earlier, which is that for light duty, given the market growth and the fact that, you know, fuel cell car customers are really using their car as their first and primary vehicle, we've seen, I think, heavy demand beyond what people expected, even on the refueling side, and that caused us to look at how to scale up a lot faster. And that, I think, that scaling, being able to do, you know, more fills per day, more kilograms of hydrogen per day through a station, feeds directly into the heavy duty market. And those learnings are really synergistic with what we're going to need and more so, right, to fill a lot of heavy duty trucks at a station. So that's one. I think the second one is, for us, it's been a difficult business proposition to build hydrogen stations out in remote places, right? We have one of those stations at Harris Ranch on the I-5. We have another one of those stations in Truckee out by Lake Tahoe. And economically, they're difficult to manage, right? And so I think a really good synergy that we're looking at is, kind of like the truck stops that you see today. You have the convenience store on one side, there's the truck fueling dispensers. On the other side, there's the light duty gasoline dispensers. We see that opportunity with hydrogen, right? So you can go to these truck stops. The heavy duty trucks will need the hydrogen fueling there in these more remote locations along major freeways. But all of a sudden, you can leverage that infrastructure to add a light duty pump there as well, right? So that's what we're looking at. Whenever we build a heavy duty station, we'll look at that as an opportunity to add a light duty pump, so you can kind of provide that connectivity along major highways, whereas it might be difficult to build that station just for light duty cars from an economic perspective. And then the third one is kind of a bigger view one, right? Which is, it's kind of an interesting comparison between the car side and the infrastructure side, right? On the car side, you get a lot of volume and scale on light duty vehicles, right? Because you have to build a lot of fuel cell stacks to fill for a lot of cars. Maybe you don't get so much volume on the heavy duty trucks, because even though they're bigger vehicles and they consume more fuel, you're not building as many of them compared to the light duty vehicles. On the fuel side, it's the flip side of that, right? So on the light duty cars, you're not doing as much hydrogen refueling, right? So you're not selling as much hydrogen. Maybe there's not as much demand for infrastructure. But on the heavy duty side, there's a demand for fuel that's pretty large from day one, right? So I think the light duty and heavy duty really complement each other in that way, right? When you look at it from, well, a vehicle maker needs a lot of light duty cars to justify the scale for the heavy duty, right? And a fuel provider maybe needs, the heavy duty market to justify, the scale and the investment in the light duty side as well. So I think they'll really help each other out that way. We'll see how it all rolls out, but that's my expectation.
So you segued right into at least part of what my next question was going to be around, which is our overall goal is decarbonization. And we hear a lot about the different production, the colors of production, and the location. Where are those production plants? What are the opportunities? How does that tie into renewables or not? Distribution opportunities from gaseous to liquid to existing pipelines. Can you talk a little bit about, today's carbon content, where we are, as well as long-term, what are the targets? What's the transition and timeline towards reaching that 100% decarbonized goal?
So maybe I can take a first crack at this one, since we're pretty involved in this and doing it with our hydrogen today. So I think first of all, the state has set pretty aggressive targets for renewable hydrogen and carbon reduction, and which is great. So I think by law, all hydrogen has to be at least 33% renewable. There's a great policy mechanism at the Air Resources Board through the LCFS program that encourages all hydrogen to be 40% renewable. And actually, I believe that certainly First Element, but I think I can speak for some of our other colleagues, we're far exceeding those targets right now. So our company, for example, is selling 100% renewable hydrogen right now, and we are achieving carbon neutrality. So, according to the rigorous analyses that are done through the LCFS program, we are zero carbon, right? So our supply chain is carbon neutral, which is really exciting for us. So I think looking over the horizon, what we see is that there needs to be, I think, a continued investment in the sources so that we can keep that up, right? We don't want to kind of run out of hydrogen that or sources where our hydrogen can be renewable and zero carbon, and importantly, again, cost effective, right? We're trying to make this fuel competitive with gasoline and not ask our customers to shoulder a big burden. So from our perspective, I think it's really exciting what we're doing now. We are very interested to see continued investments upstream in sources, and I hope that we can continue to achieve 100% renewable hydrogen. From my perspective, the carbon emissions are a little bit more important, frankly, because I think you don't want to look for the means, but rather for the ends, right? So what we're really after is carbon reduction of criteria pollutants. Renewable is a nice way to get there, but not the only way to get there, right? So and again, I would say I really like the way that California sets the standards and the targets, right, and then shoots for those. I actually hate the hydrogen color wheel because then everybody's more busy defining whether the hydrogen is blue or green or pink, and we should really be doing is incentivizing the targets, which is reducing carbon, reducing criteria pollutant emissions, improving efficiency, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So I hope that California keeps doing what it's doing in its policy, and that we don't get too obsessed with the color wheel. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yep, good stuff. Only thing I think I was going to say, a lot of what you just said there, Shane. The first I'll say is the policy is working, right? Clearly being above and beyond the requirements is a good thing. The key is how you keep that sustainable, which requires investment in these new plants here. I'll note, there's goals by UC Irvine Studies, the Hydrogen Council itself, looking at this 2030 type targets. So clearly there's this, again, guidepost by a number of different folks studying that when it's possible, and two, it really is a goal and a target. And I think the last piece that I'll share here indeed is on the different options you noted. And Bill, I think it's going to be all over the place. So to the point of how you make this work, we're not going to say you must use liquid hydrogen to distribute anything. There's going to be a lot of different ways that will be distributed, produced from bio sources, nuclear, from electrolysis, you name it, large scale centralized to distributed at the site. I think we need all of it. We're going to see all of it, and all companies are taking their own strategies, but one isn't necessarily better than the other in a lot of forms.
I'm going to go ahead and let James and Shane go ahead and answer those. So we'll go on to the next one, Bill.
Great. Well, I'm looking at our time, and I think what I'd like to do is kind of bring this back around to kind of a last statement and question about target setting. We're looking at the partnership of leading kind of a new activity with a broader than just our membership, but a broader stakeholder base to really cement these larger targets into, state and maybe even federal type planning and activities to really enable not just the California ZEV transition, but the national ZEV transition. And so I wanted to see if there were just any other kind of high level comments any of you might have about what California continues to do to lead the hydrogen and fuel cell revolution, create the ZEV transition here, and make it something that's more easily transferable to other regions within the US and around the world. But we're really talking about target setting, the large object or the large activities in order to enable the small successes we make along the way to get there.
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in here first. So I'll try to keep it short here, but right, if there were stronger targets, stronger policy elsewhere, I think Shane alluded to that, that's where the market would be, right? So clearly the fact that there's this vision, there's this desire to get to an end goal that means something that we're all driving towards. How we get there sometimes changes, and exactly who is part of it continues to change. But the amount of private investment, public investment, and just dedication from broader stakeholders that continues to grow, not shrink. I think we're seeing more larger players jump into the California market here, is clearly showing that these signals are valuable and needed to really drive the kind of investment and direction that we need to eventually get to this carbon neutral future that we're all striving for.
Yeah, I think my only message is keep going. We have great momentum. I think we're seeing solutions to the growing pains that we've experienced. We're about to see a lot of great investments come into fruition. Stay the course, double down. I don't know how to put it, but I think it's a very exciting growth trajectory that we're on. Hydrogen is going to play a huge role in the transportation sector, and then I think further down the road, once we have a bit of a hydrogen ecosystem, we can leverage that to actually do more with renewables and storage as well. So it's very exciting.
I agree. It is such an exciting time. I would like to add maybe on a little bit of a simpler level what we're continuing to do from government agencies. We have worked really, really hard to unsilo our agencies and truly work together. It's been very impressive to watch that over the 17 years that I've been part of CARB. Really working closely now with the CEC and the PUC on multiple projects and having our staffs really working well together. And we need to continue to do that into the regional and local governments between the permitting and the land use. And of course, GoBiz has been just instrumental in helping us bridge those gaps. And doing that from our side of the equation, I think, is going to be one of the key factors of not only the target setting, but the implementation. And then from the California Fuel Cell Partnership, I am very excited about this expanded role that we're looking to play, broadening the discussion, not only amongst our members, but others, including our environmental key leadership and communities that we're reaching out to be a solution. And so the more inclusive, both on the government side and of course on the stakeholder side, I think assures that pattern of success that both James and Shane have been talking about today.
Yeah, and with that, I want to thank all three of you and everybody else who joined us. I mean, you all represent that collective village that builds a society and leads us with the right goals and objectives. You've done that individually with your respective agencies and organizations. I've seen it collectively really push this market forward in, 5 or 6 years. This is a really interesting time. You don't see many markets get up on their feet this quickly. And while we have some near-term challenges in front of us, we're also working on those as well as the long-term transition that is that village objective. And so I want to thank Sandy, Shane, James for everything you've done today and continue to do. I look forward to working with you, and thanks everyone for joining us today.